welcome to In Search of the Crystal Skull, an epic adventure into the world of mediocrity. My name is Aaron,
My name is Patricia.
and this month we are going to go into the wonderful world of Jim Henson.
Yeah, so I think that the reason why we're doing this is for multiple reasons. We are one of the many people in our generation who grew up with Jim Henson's and his Muppets, whether it be with Sesame Street or with the Muppet Show or any of the Muppets TV series and spin-offs. I think that the relevance of Jim Henson with the new documentary up on Disney Plus, Jim Henson Idea Man, had pretty much spurred the idea of people reminiscing about how great the Muppets were.
Yeah, exactly. And so to celebrate the wonderful mind of Jim Henson, we are going to be going into some Muppet movies. Now, here's the thing about this. Before everyone gets the wrong idea, we both love the Muppets, and he has made the Muppets have made some really great movies over the years. And so, while there has been a Muppets Christmas Carol, there has been the Muppet movie itself, and also there was the revival also of the Muppets in 2011. And but unfortunately, these are the movies that we're talking about that are really more towards the middle, really. They're not really towards the top, the ones that are the favorites that we really like. So these are the movies that we're going to be covering this time around.
Yeah, and also we're going to be talking about two movies that are not necessarily within the Muppets universe, but they do involve with puppetry and live action actors and a lot of creativity. So we'll be talking about those in our discussion this month.
Okay. So the first one that we're going to go into is the 1981, which some people consider a classic and other people say it's a bit of a mess. It is the Great Muppet Caper.
So this is the second film out of the Muppets, whereas the first film was the original Muppet movie from 1979, which recently just celebrated its 45th anniversary, which is kind of crazy to think that it's been over 45 years since one of the definitive classic properties have actually, showcase in our pop culture. Now, I know a lot of people know about the history of the Muppets, where it started off as like a TV show from the 50s known as Sam and Friends, and then eventually it spun off into its own series of TV shows and movies featuring these iconic characters where we have Jim Henson starting off in Sesame Street and then eventually spitting off into his own thing where it was leaning more kind of like a mixture between kids and adults, and then eventually the Muppets became so well known that they started off in the Muppet movie from the 70s, and now we have our second installment where it did have a mixed reaction when it first came out. A lot of people nowadays see it as a classic, while some others feel that there are some other movies from the Muppets that are better. So yeah, let's see how we feel about this.
Well, the first thing I would definitely say is that before we even get into the Great Muppet Caper, I think we need to have a look at probably the Muppets movie itself, because the Muppets movie is a classic. It is a legendary movie in
It
its
is.
sense, and so the storyline, and putting the fact of like the Muppetry and Jim Henson and like the whole magic of the Muppets aside. I mean, let's just look at the storyline just like in its basic form. So the original movie effectively was about Kermit living on a swamp, and he's approached by a Hollywood agent to audition for a chance of a lifetime, and that is to go have his big breakup in Hollywood. And then obviously all sorts of shenanigans happen. Kermit ends up being a spokesperson for a frog's leg food chain, and whatever everything kind of goes pear-shaped after that, and all sorts of shenanigans go into that. So I mean, obviously you got the classic kind of like Muppet, like grandizing, going up, and obviously the payoff after that. And by the way, the ending of this movie is beautiful. I love the
It
ending of the
is.
Muppets movie. Yeah, this time around in the Great Muppet Caper, I think it sort of feels a bit kind of downplayed a little bit, because now we basically start off with Kermit, Fozzie, and Gonzo, basically, but balloon kind of like commenting on the credits that are going on through a blue screen, which are
Yeah,
kind of like
whereas in
yeah.
the beginning of the movie where you have Kermit sitting on his swamp with his banjo playing, performing Rainbow Connection, which is one of the most beautiful songs, like not even just with Muppets, but ever. Like
Yeah,
it
you
is
know
an
what? I
amazing
love Rainbow Connection so much. I would actually, if I have had an opportunity to get a bunch of football supporters to sing Rainbow Connection on the terraces, I would so take that opportunity. So yeah, that's how much I love Rainbow Connection. But
Yeah, whereas like, with Rainbow Connection, you can definitely see the the humbleness that Kermit is just sitting on his swamp and performing this amazing song, and then him just being thrusted over into this huge road picture where he has the opportunity to become a star. Now in the second movie, you just have them harpooning the facts that, oh, we're in a movie. We're just reading off the credits. Oh, when are the credits going to be over? Oh, don't worry, it'll be over soon. Man, why is it taking so long? Oh, just wait until you sit through the end. That's when the credits are really long. So, yeah, they are basically just, doing a whole bunch of fourth wall jokes in the opening of the movie.
Yeah, which is kind of like, well, I mean, in a way, it is clever, but I mean, judging by today's comedic standards, it probably isn't. I mean, like, I
Yeah,
mean,
the fourth
maybe.
wall, I guess that it's true. Fourth wall breaking humor wasn't as common back in the 80s compared to now, where, you pretty much just have like every single movie where you would see a little bit of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I mean, we get that a lot with like even recent Disney films where you have like all these homages that are just like shoved in your throats. It's like, hey, remember this thing from from a movie that you may or may not have grown up with, but is, pretty old to the point in which everybody knows about it. I guess, I mean, sure. The only exceptions I would think about with like these films that are a little bit on the nose with its fourth wall breaking humor is probably like Mel Brooks films like Blazing Saddle or Young Frankenstein or Spaceballs. But yeah, I mean, like I said, those were like pretty uncommon back in the day. Nowadays, a lot of movies are pretty much like that. And so when you're sitting down and watching it in today's eyes, yeah, it feels kind of forced more than humorous.
Yeah, it definitely does. So, we go into the first musical act, which, by the way, I mean, like, is what the Muppets are basically known for. Every single Muppet movie basically has like the opening musical act that goes into this. So, if anything, the Muppet movie and the Great Muppet Caper are no strangers, in this genre to start off with this. But we're kind of just gonna land in like, undescript city, kind of like, I'm guessing this is like, Somewheresville, USA, somewhere. But did it actually say
Well,
where we
yeah, I
landed?
mean, in the beginning of the movie, they are in London because they witness Lady
No, no,
Holiday.
before then, because
Oh, before then,
they
yes.
land into like some undescript city in America, and then it's shown that they're like journalists to like try and find out who it is that basically been committing a bunch of robberies, and the leads that they've been going on before they effectively get fired, but then get somewhat rehired again in like the same 2 minutes. Like they end up having to go to London, and that's the reason why they ended up in London because that's where basically they ended up going. So
Yeah,
yeah, so we get the joke of them basically being placed in ninth class, and then instead of like actually landing in London, they actually get thrown off the plane and thrown into a lake.
yeah,
So
pretty much. Where, yeah, so essentially in this movie, we have Kermit and Fonzie are reporters for a newspaper, and Gonzo is their photographer. And there's this whole running gag about like, Kermit and Fozzie are twin brothers, and the only difference that you can tell that they're not is that Fozzie wears a hat, and when he takes off his hat, nobody can tell that they who they are apart. And you have them being they are so not paying attention to what's going on that they didn't even witness that Lady Holiday's necklace was stolen by someone. And so that's when they're at the verge of getting fired. But then when they try to convince them to give them another chance, then that's when they decide that they're going to go to London so that they can be able to cover this story about who was the one responsible for stealing her necklace and if they can be able to piece together some clues as to finding out who the culprit is. Whereas the first movie, it was a road picture. This is a heist film.
yeah, and so basically, I mean, if you're wondering how long this like it takes to basically to get us into like the next act, this whole thing with like Lady Holiday and trying to catch the thieves who keep stealing a necklace. I mean, this kind of goes on for like 1.5 acts effectively into the movie. Until we
Yeah.
finally get into eventually, what the trailer eventually was actually advertising, which is that Miss Piggy basically gets like framed for the thievery going on, and she gets arrested, and it's up for the our heroes to effectively clear Miss Piggy's name
Yeah.
effectively. But it's a that's actually what was advertised. Actually, I remember actually that being advertised in the trailers. In the VHS tapes, and I think actually it wasn't. I mean, around, it wasn't. I wasn't around where back in the 80s, but I remember when they were going to be releasing this on VHS, and I remember they were made a big deal of like the fact that oh hey, it's Miss Piggy who basically gets framed for stealing the necklaces, and now it's up for our heroes to save the day. But I mean, you think that was basically how the movie would start out, but it isn't. You don't really get that until basically the end of the second act. So.
Yeah, so throughout the course of the movie, we have obviously Kermit, Fozzie, and Gonzo checking in a hotel, which is pretty much run down and surrounded by all the classic Muppet characters. You have Scooter, you have Rolf, you have Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem, the Swedish Chef, Dr. Honeydew, Beaker, Sam the Eagle, various characters that you would know from the Muppet Show are located in this rundown hotel. But they need to stay there because that's the only place that they can stay there that's free.
By the
And
way, for anyone who's wondering how does this work in the continuity of the Muppet Show and the Muppet movie, well, welcome to the Muppets. There is no continuity. So.
yeah, at this point in time, if you're wondering about like, oh, what is the continuity between, the first Muppet movie and the Great Muppet Caper? No, don't even bother with it. I
Will
know
we
that.
dare try and work out which one's the prequel and which one's the sequel in the Muppet saga? Would we even dare to try and approach that?
I
The same way
wouldn't.
that they do. Like when AVG ended the chronologically confused Zelda games. Will we
Yes.
dare do that with the Muppets?
No.
Effectively, no.
No, no, no. Not even scientists with a high PhD and tons of years of research trying to be able to deduce about, if aliens are up on space. I don't think that they'll be able to come up with a chronologically sound timeline about where in the Muppets take place in any time period. Even with the Muppet babies going over to the Muppets, I don't think that that would even work.
Forget timeline. Imagine you've just finished putting on your dryer, and then you're pulling the lint out of the bit where it catches all the lint, in the
Yes.
in the dryer. It's time lint. It's just that's where all the movies basically are all messed around in that ball, effectively. So
Yeah, and I guess I
it's
could
time
give
lint.
it yeah, it's Timeland. I guess I could give it kudos because I guess if you're not familiar with the Muppets, if you just like watch this as your first Muppet movie, you can be able to not worry about like, oh, who's this character? And oh, what is their storyline about? How do they know each other? I mean, all the Muppet movies and even all the Muppet TV shows are pretty much different. They follow in the same logic as when Shigeru Miyamoto talked about the Mario characters, in which like yes, I mean, they're all essentially characters in a stage play. Like you can be able to put them in a whole bunch of different scenarios and they can be able to do anything. Like you could have Bowser be the bad guy in one game and then Bowser helping out Mario and Luigi in another game. Or even with like the Looney Tunes characters, you have Bugs and Daffy in this situation, but then you have Daffy and Porky in another situation, or you have Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner in this situation. So yeah, very similar to those characters. You're able to play around with all of the different scenarios. It's like, okay, you have, Kermit wanting to be an actor in this incarnation, but then now he's a reporter in this one. So, yeah, I guess I can be able to understand that there wasn't supposed to be like a shared universe with all these characters that they did the same thing and they known each other from this movie or TV show that everybody has to watch in order for them to understand it. No, they're standalone features.
Yeah. So, I mean, the one thing I think is hilarious, I think, is the introduction to Miss Piggy, because, where she, pretty much just chews up the scenery, in this whole thing. Not to say, no Muppets don't, all of them do, but, I think Miss Piggy definitely does it in her own special way, I think we can say.
Yeah. Yeah, she wants to become a model for Lady Holiday's fashion show, and she's showing off her portfolio and everything, but she is so distracted from the fact that her stuff was stolen and that she has no consideration for Miss Piggy because she already has her own models to showcase her fashion that she decides to put her as her secretary. And then when Kermit comes in, Kermit thinks that Miss Piggy is Lady Holiday and he wants to interview her. And then, of course, Miss Piggy, being Miss Piggy, falls in love with Kermit immediately. And, she's infatuated with him. And then he asks her, oh, you want to like go on a date so that we can be able to discuss more about this? And she's thinking, oh, yes, I'd like to go on a date with you, Kermit. Absolutely. Meet me at this place, even though that, she kind of like made it up on the spot, but in reality, that place actually does exist.
Oh, it's just this is the great thing about the humor of the Muppets. I mean, it can get a bit campy sometimes, and somebody's kind of like, ugh, but it is still, even if it is bad, it's still hilariously bad in its own way. So
Yeah,
I think
I think that one of the
that's
most
I think that's the one thing I think that some comedies just haven't got right like in modern humor. I think I think they definitely use them. I would definitely say this that some modern comedies I think use the Muppets. I think is somewhat of like an idea of like how to convey their idea of comedy, but I don't think they know how to get the wit, the humor, and the charm that the Muppets can do. I think
Mhm.
I don't think any like the modern comedies I think that use them up as inspiration are able to like emulate what they have on the screen compared to what Jim Henson tried to do.
Right. And speaking of which, this is the only Muppet movie that Jim Henson directed, where as all the other films were directed by other people. And after this movie, he would go on and direct The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, and he left everybody else to direct the other Muppet movies.
Which, by the way, we will get to eventually. So,
Yes, we will.
yeah. But anyway, the Muppet movie. So, the one thing I think, another positive I think we should say is that the effects are really good in this movie. Like,
Yes.
the fact that you see the Muppets riding bicycles and like riding like motorcycles and like even in some cases driving as well. Like that in itself, I think, is actually pretty spectacular because as far as I'm aware, I mean, like I don't think we saw too much of that in the Muppet movie, did we?
I mean, we
Uh,
did in the original where Kermit was riding his bicycle,
yeah.
but in this one, both Kermit and Miss Piggy and Dr. Teeth in the Electric Mayhem were riding bicycles,
And also there
and they
was the
were
taxi
driving.
driving as well. Yeah, that
Yeah,
was
there was a
going on too.
taxi driver, and yes, we did have the scene in the first Muppet movie where Kermit and Fonzie were driving a car, but yeah, they definitely elevated it a lot more in this movie. I think that they were able to get the techniques done really well.
Cool.
Yeah, but I think another scene that was really impressive, which they didn't do in the first movie, was the Miss Piggy's underwater scene, in which when, the fashion show is going on and she imagines herself as being part of the models, and there's this whole synchronized swimming scene where she's like swimming and everybody else is swimming, and there's this huge gush of water that's spewing out, and then she's like on top and everybody is just like dancing around her. I mean, even the dancing scene, which was also a major highlight as well. I think that the choreography on that was excellent. Like the song, the first time it happened.
The one thing I'll say is that with that scene, like you're so captivated, like because keep in mind, like they first, kind of like before they even introduced that scene. I mean, obviously you've got the moment when Miss Piggy and Kermit are like having that dance, in the ball, and like you have everybody else kind of like dancing around them, like in this whole like cabaret kind of like thing. And so you're kind of you slowly introduced into that world effectively. But before then, and then obviously you get to like the runway scene, and then obviously they're doing like the whole like fashion show and everything. And but I think because you have so much that's you're so still trying to get your head around at that point that for me when I first saw the synchronized swimming scene, like I didn't think of like the next bunch of questions until it all happened afterwards. Like wow. How did they get Miss Piggy underwater? How did they like do all of this? And then when you kind of like look back on it a while, you kind of like realize, oh yeah, they've played some bits backwards, or like you can tell that they use different kind of like different models of Miss Piggy that could probably handle water probably better than like the felt version. I probably imagine. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's true.
the eventually, but when you first see it, it's spectacular.
Hmm. Yeah, and also the dancing scene where you have Kermit and Miss Piggy dancing with one another is also a really well done scene as well, where they first, where they first have the song the first time it happens, where you have Kermit and Miss Piggy dance, and then eventually everybody else starts dancing, and then there's this whole huge moment where all the guys are surrounding Miss Piggy and dancing around her. It definitely feels like a 1940s, 1950s film coming into life. So I also really like that moment as well. I mean, I would say that this movie does have some pretty memorable moments. I think that one of the most memorable moments that everybody points out to is the scene in which when Miss Piggy tells Kermit to meet her at the mansion, which she claims that is her own, and you have the people who are living there who are like kind of very stuck up and just very dry-witted with one another, and they just are not paying attention to the fact
And
that Miss
by the
Piggy is
way,
just
we say hello again once again to the legendary comedian John Cleese as well.
yes.
So,
Yeah, so
and for those of you who don't know, where we did actually do Faulty Towers, and John Cleese obviously was Basil Fawlty in that, and also for you Muppet fans, he also did. This is not his only appearance in a Muppet related thing. He also was in the Muppet Show as well.
Yes, he
So
was. Yes.
yeah.
So I guess yeah, so yeah, John Cleese's performance here as the homeowner was hilarious where, he's just talking to his wife about like, oh, did we get rid of all the animals? It's like, yeah, we don't have any dogs and cats anymore. And then he just
Not
sees
all
Miss
of them.
Yeah, not all of them. And then eventually, when he confronts Miss Piggy and Kermit when he sees them in the closet, and then she says, "Oh, do you recommend a nice place for us to eat?" And then he says, "Oh, you go to this restaurant. It's very fancy." And then you have, them
Well,
leaving, and then the wife.
I just love, like, John Cleese's timing at this. Like, he can't quite grasp the idea that there's an anthropomorphic frog and an anthropomorphic pig in his closet. And, like, they're asking things. And he's just like, oh, yeah, well, like, there's this, that, and the other. It's like, he can't comprehend the idea that that thing exists in his
Yes.
mind, and that whole thing is just gold. I love how, like, you can see in John Cleese's, like, the way that he does the performance in that is like it's he can't quite grasp the idea of this happening to him, but he still has like the class like to like interact normally with people, like, oh yeah, like to be polite and like British and like everything like that. That's incredible.
Yeah.
I
And
think
then
that's so good.
yeah, and then when his wife confronts him about it, he's like, "Oh yeah, I just recommend these people to come to go over to this restaurant." And instead of just saying, "Wait a minute, there was a talking pig and a talking frog. Where do they come from?" She was like, "Oh, well, you can't recommend that restaurant. That restaurant is it only serves certain food at a certain time." And then he's like, "Yeah, I know what I said." So, yeah, they were just like going over the banter about like the place that they recommended Kermit and Miss Piggy to go to, as opposed to the fact that you have a frog and a pig who just entered into your house without without you even knowing it. So again, that scene is just gold.
If you want one continuity that kind of constantly keeps going through anything Muppet related, whether it's the Electric Mayhem or whether it's downtown to Kermit itself, all the humans just accept that there's Muppets running around. Effectively.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
I
great.
mean, yes, in this universe, humans and Muppets coincide with one another, and there's no question as to why. It just is.
Yeah, it's like I might, this could be an episode of the Twilight Zone. Like, a guy just comes down like he's never heard of the Muppets, and like he just walks around and like he just sees like Muppets coming out of cupboards and like coming out of like stoves and like running doing taxi runs and things like that. And like he's like saying, what are all the like these felt covered like things running around, and like nobody dares question it.
Yeah.
No one does question. He's like, oh yeah, that's just that. Like
Yeah,
just
yeah. Didn't you know that's Kermit? That's our next door neighbor. It's like, but it's a frog. So
so.
he's a nice, yeah, so he's a nice guy. He's a photographer. He's a great singer. He, babysits my kids from time to time. He's a good guy, but he's a frog.
So, and that's when he goes mad, and that's yeah.
Yeah.
Cue the intro. Here, sorry, cue the
Yeah.
outro. Do do
Yeah,
do 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 do
it'll
do.
be more demented than if it'll be more demented when Charlton Heston was in the Planet of the Apes movies.
Oh man. Oh, can you imagine? Can you imagine the Muppets doing Planet of the Apes?
Oh, jeez.
That
Okay,
that
we have one human, just one, wandering around in this world that has been taken over by the Muppets, and he thinks that he's in another planet, but no, in
You
reality,
know
he's
what?
been on
I'm
Earth
really
this
surprised.
entire time.
Given the fact that what we have, how many Planet of the Apes revival sequels have we had so far? Like,
There's been several of them. There was
there's
that Tim Burton revival that happened in 2001. Then there was the other Planet of the Apes revival that happened in 2011, and we still have sequels based off of that. And in fact, as of the recording of this podcast, the newest Planet of the Apes movies just came out a few months ago.
I'm really surprised that we haven't had like at least a parody. I mean, like, who owns Planet of the Apes franchise at the moment? It's not
That would
Disney, is it?
be, well, technically yes, because Fox was the one who did the Planet of the Apes movies.
Okay, I mean, like, I'm really surprised that they thought, oh hey, let's do this Planet of the Apes parody with the Muppets. And like, I'm
Yeah,
sure it'll
I'm
be
surprised.
hilarious.
I'm sure they have done it, but we probably have to look back at like all the Muppet Show episodes and see if they actually did one, or maybe like there was a Muppet special they probably did that one. I'm not sure. It's been a long time since I've
Mind you,
tuned into an episode of it.
how fun would a Muppets version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory be?
Oh, that would have been great.
Yeah,
Absolutely. That would be
it'd be better than crossing over Tom and Jerry, don't you think?
Yes. I can imagine that. I can imagine you have Gonzo as Willy Wonka, and you can have Robin as Charlie, and you have Kermit as, well, not Grandpa Joe, but maybe like Uncle Kermit or something. And they have this huge world where they get to be able to explore. You have Rizzo as one of the Oompa Loompas, and you have like all the other characters who are playing off like their typical characters. I can definitely see Miss Piggy as Veruca Salt, or maybe Janice could be Violet Beauregard, or any of the other characters can probably be, like swapped in. Like I can see Scooter being Mike TV, or I can see Fonzie being like who would be good for Fonzie? I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. Would you put Fonzie in as Willy Wonka, maybe? Or
Oh, okay, maybe I could see either Fonzie or Gonzo as Willy Wonka.
that'd be interesting, wouldn't it? Or what if you had both? They
Two
both,
Willy Wonkas. Sure,
yeah.
why not?
I don't know. It'd be something different. Hey, you have what I mean, or maybe you have them both as like Kermit and Fonzie, like they're the Wonka brothers, effectively. They're twins. So
Okay, yeah,
there's
Fonzie and Gonzo, the Wonka brothers. I
yeah.
like that.
Anyway, I'm sorry for everybody who's saying we're getting off topic for the Muppet Caper, but I guess we can probably get into the negatives, I guess, of this, and that is that in regards to the story, I've got to be honest, there's not much to write home about. It's just like a heist movie, effectively. There's a bunch of models who want to basically steal all these diamonds, and they're using effectively the brother of the sister who owns the fashion line to basically get away with all these evil deeds. And then, it's up to our Muppet heroes effectively to thwart their attempts to, frame Miss Piggy for the crimes and be able to, get the good story in the end. So, that is basically the Muppet story in a nutshell. Now, I'm sure there's going to be out there saying, well, the Muppet stories have never always been Russian novels or anything like that. And I'm not saying they're not, but I've got to be honest with compared to all the other times we've been on adventures with the Muppets, so far. I guess this is probably with the exception of Muppets from Space, which by the way, Muppets from Space is like a terrible Muppet movie, but I guess maybe the Great Muppet Caper doesn't have much of a to give you in regards to to story wise, I guess.
Yeah, whereas
Like,
all the other Muppet movies had a really compelling story. Like the first movie, you had Kermit coming in from humble roots to being a star. You had Muppets Made Manhattan, where you have all the characters coming in together, and you have that one scene in which when Kermit gets amnesia, and then everybody tries to recollect on, trying to bring his memories back, and he is thinking that he's like much more higher in society than when he actually is. And also, Muppets Made Manhattan is a pretty important movie because not only because, it's a great film, but also because it was the catalyst for the Muppet Babies TV show when we had that flashback scene.
yeah,
And then
but I would
there's
also argue that Muppets Made Manhattan is a very humble story because if you keep in mind, the Muppets are in their third movie, they're pretty well known at this point, and they go into New York, they can't get success, and so they basically have to go their separate ways and to try and find out, where how on earth they can get this all sorted. While Kermit kind of sits there in New York, effectively all by himself to try and salvage this whole project that he wants to do with
yeah, and,
everybody.
and if you are one of those people who said, "Oh, that goodbye song didn't make me cry," you're a liar.
Yeah, oh, yeah, I cried at that song.
So did I. And
Um,
also, The Muppets Christmas Carol is also a perennial classic for a lot of people. It's a movie that people tune into every single year because the original Charles Dickens novel, A Christmas Carol, is a timeless classic that everybody who's anyone has done adaptations of, and seeing the Muppets do their own version of it is a lot of fun.
I was about to get to that actually because I would say Muppets Christmas Carol and Muppets Treasure Island, and also the Muppets Wizard of Oz movie, if you want to count that, kind of don't count because they're already based on stories that already exist, in the world. So where the Muppets Take Manhattan and the Great Muppet Caper and the Muppet movie are all sort of original stories. So
Okay, and then you have the 2011 The Muppets, and then you have Muppets Most Wanted, where they're also original stories. Where, you have the 2011 Muppets movie, where it's essentially like them trying to save the studio and trying to be able to get their relevance back. And then you have Muppets Most Wanted, where, yeah, it's definitely a very solid film where you have a whole bunch of moments where They're just trying to be able to, get things going. And
To
I
be
think
fair,
that,
though, to Muppets Most Wanted, I mean, I was going to ask you about this probably towards the end of the episode, but I mean, the Great Muppet Caper is the sequel to the Muppet movie, I guess you could say, in
yes,
like in release day. And Muppets Most Wanted is the sequel to the Muppets. I mean,
yes.
the one thing I would say about Muppets Most Wanted is that at the very beginning of the movie, it's pretty much admitting that the second movie is not going to be as good as like the original 2011 movie. Pretty much,
Yeah.
and so, but I mean, the Great Muppet Caper kind of doesn't admit that in a way, but you can kind of see that it's not as good as like the original Muppet movie. So, I mean, dare I say, probably the Muppet Movie Models is probably giving us a more truthful kind of like experience, in this movie than the Great Muppet Caper is. Really,
Mm.
that's
I
just
mean, to
how I
be
take
fair,
it.
to be fair, they had about like over 30 years of experience with the Muppet characters in order for them to come up with that kind of story.
Yeah.
Where this is the second movie of the Muppets ever made. For Muppets Most Wanted, it's like the eighth or ninth. So they already could make those kind of jokes saying like, "Oh, we already know that it's not going to be as amazing as the 2011 version where it tugged in your heartstrings and it was able to bring back these characters into the limelight for the first time in almost 20 years." Yeah, we already know that it's not going to be as good. But whereas the Muppet Caper, it's essentially like, this is them trying to do something a little bit different than what the first Muppet movie did.
Hmm. So.
Anyway, but yeah, I would say that I would the motivations of the villains is pretty weak, like just to the point at which it's almost non-existent. I mean, the
But
only
again, you could put that down to the story being weak as well. Like, I mean,
yeah.
the character motivations are all in all this. I mean, like, Kermit's, and Miss Piggy are in love with each other. I mean, like, that's part of the course for a Muppet movie. Unless you talk, you can't, unless you cancel out like the modern TV series. But
Yeah, and then Fonzie and Gonzo acting silly is par for the course, where Fonzie is basically just like second banana to Kermit because they're twin brothers, and then you have Gonzo taking pictures of everything and everyone. Again, that's not out of the ordinary for Gonzo and
But
all
then
the other.
eventually, like, Gonzo would actually, Fonzie would actually end up kind of like, in a way, teaming up with Gonzo in a way. Like, you saw that, like, in Muppet Christmas Carol and also in Muppet's Treasure Island, too. So,
Mhm.
like, I mean, like, the only time, like, Gonzo wasn't with Fozzie was probably at the time when either Long John Silver was on the screen or whether, the kid was on the screen. So,
Right.
like, there was that. So, I think, yeah, so I mean the original three ended up I think not ended up being together too for too long, but I think so yeah, but I think in regards to the relationship between like our three characters, like three main characters in this, like with Kermit, Fozzie, and Gonzo, I think they do work well as a three, in the Muppet Caper when they're together on the screen, but just don't expect too much of it compared to like when you had the original Muppet movie.
Yeah, and I would say that all the other characters are pretty much just like there just for cameo appearances, like Dr. Teeth and the Mutant Mayhem, Dr. Honeydew, Beaker, Rolf, Scooter.
Wait, did you say
Yeah,
Mutant Mayhem? You mean Electric Mayhem, don't you?
yeah, Electric Mayhem. What am I talking
Yeah,
about?
you
Mutant
got
Mayhem.
TMNT on the mind there.
Yes, I do have TMNT on my mind. Yes. Anyway, but yeah,
Cowabunga,
like
guys.
yeah, so yeah, with the Electric Mayhem, they're just there as like cameo appearances. They don't really play too much into the story, with the exception of maybe Animal, but I mean, it's just Animal acting like Animal.
I
And
mean, like, funny enough, Animal, I think, is still lovable, even if he is still himself, like, so, I mean, it's, the great thing I think about this is that, this is only the second time around that we're having, our opportunity to basically spend time with the Muppets. And so, I mean, I would say that, you can be more forgiving, I think, with the Great Muppet Caper. If you've seen all the other Muppet movies before this, I mean, I would argue that you're not going to really see anything different from our Muppet characters than you would have done like in all the other ones. Like every Muppet is effectively still going to be in character effectively and not evolved to the point where you might have like seen in like in the previous incarnation.
yeah, I
Uh,
guess that's true because at this point in time with the Great Muppet Caper, you had the original Muppet movie and you had the Muppet Show, which at the time had already ended its run. So, yeah, I mean, we already had these characters well established at this point.
yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah, I just
and
wish that there would have been a lot more to the characters that we've already seen, but I can see where you're coming from.
yeah, and in regards to the music, I mean, like all the musical numbers do stick,
Yes,
and
they're great. They're great musical
the
numbers.
Miss Piggy one of it is hilarious, I think, and it definitely goes with the visuals.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that the first time it happened is definitely a major highlight. Happiness Hotel is actually a great moment too, where you got to introduce all the characters in this rundown hotel that looks absolutely awful. I mean, that's also a great highlight.
Well, the best
Yeah,
thing about that is that it was great that they did it in like in a musical performance because if they didn't do that, do you think you remember also all the characters who were in that hotel? Really?
not
Like,
really,
yeah,
no.
yeah, it was. I think putting them all into that musical number and basically introducing them all, I think was probably the most efficient thing you could do in that movie with all the
Oh,
characters that were involved.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I would say that the first intro with Hey a Movie where you have Kermit, Fozzie and Gonzo basically like dancing in the streets and everybody dancing along as well, talking about like, hey, we're in a movie and we're gonna be talking about this moment that's gonna happen and this moment that's gonna happen and there's gonna be a lot of plot twists and there's gonna be a lot of romance and all that kind of stuff. So they are self-aware, but then again, all the other characters in the movie are self-aware. Lady Holiday talking to Miss Piggy saying like, I'm telling you all of this because it's exposition. You need to know about all of this so you can see it all play out later. So yeah, again, they're playing into the whole fourth wall breaking, self-aware humor.
So, and in regards to, I mean, I think the way that the climax I think happens, in the third act, I think comes all together. I think very rather well. I think that, it's hilarious seeing Miss Piggy break out of jail, and she does it kind of like, not like Shawshank Redemption, but the typical like, but instead of like hiding away in the sheets, like she actually kind of like boards like the back of like the truck and just like is holding on for dear life. I thought that was pretty hilarious when they introduced that, as a knock to, that kind of trope.
Yeah,
So,
and then of course when, that car, when she, then eventually she has to go into a truck where, she asks him, "Can I please get a ride?" And then the truck driver says, "No, I'm sorry, no passengers." And so she basically just like threw him out and stole the car, which by the way, that would actually get her back in jail. Not for the fact that, she, may or may not have stolen the jewelry, but the fact that she, assaulted a man and stole his truck. I mean, that could also get you arrested, but they never bring it up because, Muppets.
mhm.
You can get away with anything at this point in time. I mean, except for jewelry robbery, but if you didn't do it, then that's okay.
Yeah, apparently
But
stealing a motorcycle apparently is also, totally acceptable as well. But, falsely being accused of jewelry, nah, that's jail.
yeah,
Yeah.
and also like, damage to property when she smashes the window and, stops the thieves from taking the baseball diamond. No, 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 no. You don't have to worry about being arrested for essentially, destroying public property. Nope, just as long as you didn't steal that jewelry, you're perfectly good to
Oh yeah,
go.
running a jewel thief over in a motorcycle is like it's totally reasonable force.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely. Yeah.
citizens arrest, It's like, oh man, just it's but mind you, I mean, you can forgive all this because it's the Muppets, like it's supposed to be hilarious. So,
Yeah.
like, I mean
And
that you
and it
can
was
forgive.
hilarious, by the way.
Yeah, so I think, so they go to the Joel thieves in the end, and they all go back to. Actually, by the way, all of them, don't stay in the UK. They all go back to the USA. Whether that was a nod and a wink to the fact that the Muppet Show was over at that point, and they're all going back to America. I don't know, but
I have no idea,
yeah,
but
it
yeah, I
sounds
mean,
like it was.
how did you feel about Lady Holiday's brother hitting on Miss Piggy? I thought that that was actually really creepy.
I mean, like, I think they were trying to play it for laughs. I think, and
Yeah, I'm
but to
sorry.
be honest with you,
I
like,
didn't.
the brother, hitting on Miss Piggy. By the way, he wasn't the first, and he won't be the last. Like,
That's true.
there's been a lot of human characters who are like, good gracious, Hornswoggle from like WWE even hit on Miss Piggy, like, for to as that. So like, it won't be the first, and it won't be the last. You
That's
know.
true. But I guess in the context of this story where Miss Piggy is actually working for Lady Holiday as her assistant, and then, he's like talking all over her, saying, like, "Oh, you want to go out together, you want to do this, I can get you anything you want." Yeah, that comes across as sexual harassment.
That's sexual harassment, and I don't need to put up with it.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what? I think I think the reason they did that with the villain was obviously to make him like a villain, like he is really just a slime ball. effectively, who has no moral compass. So I
That's
think
true. I
it,
mean, he basically just like squandered all of his money and he's working for his sister so that he can be able to continue to live the luxurious life. Apparently that wasn't enough for him, and he decides to, steal the jewelry alongside with the three other models who for some reason have a vendetta on Lady Holiday because she's talking about them negatively. I mean, yeah, again, this is a pretty weak motivation behind them.
yeah, exactly. So, I mean, like, this is the thing. I think the one thing that definitely needed improving, I think, with the Muppet Caper, but whether it was actually necessary or not to do it, I think is in the eye of the beholder, and that is that the human characters, and I think the story itself, I think could have used a bit more fleshing out. But I mean, for a Muppet movie, that's sort of like can be forgivable, really. I mean, given the fact that most Muppet movies don't really concentrate too much, like that in depth in the story. It's more about the comedic timing, and it's more about the jokes, and it's more about the fact. It's more about the Muppets because that's what the movie's about. The Muppets.
Yeah,
So.
so I guess a lot of people could forgive the Great Muppet Caper for having a weak story because the characters, at least the Muppets, are very, very memorable, and there's a lot of memorable scenes that are funny. So I guess there's some instances where people can say, yeah, it's true, but at the same time, this isn't like, Gone with the Wind or Citizen Kane. It's a Muppet movie. What do you expect?
Mhm. So I think we're ready to score this, I think,
All
at
right,
this
let's
point.
do it.
Yeah, so I mean, here's the thing, like forgive the story, forgive the human characters. Look, it's the Muppets. They are, they are wonderful in this movie. I love the Miss Piggy scenes. I love the, Kermit and Miss Piggy's relationship. I love, the relationship amongst all the Muppet characters in this movie. And I do like the chase, and also all the cameos I think also fit as well. John Cleese I think was brilliant. I think in this time around with the Muppets. And so, I mean, if I had to give it a score, I mean, 8.5 out of 10, I would say.
Yeah, I would give it an 8 out of 10. I think that the humor sticks really, really well. I know that it could be a little bit overwhelming with the fourth wall breaking and, self-aware humor can be kind of obnoxious for some people. But at the same time, I mean, they were trying to do something a little bit different that wasn't the same as the first Muppet movie. At least, it wasn't like a road trip movie and they weren't doing the same beats as the first movie. They were trying to make a heist movie. And yeah, I would give credit that they were trying to do something different that made it stand on its own compared to the first movie and even the Muppet Show. And yeah, I do like Kermit, Fozzie, and Gonzo. I like Miss Piggy. I like all the little funny moments with John Cleese, and I also love the dancing scenes. Miss Piggy breaking out of jail and doing all those crazy heist moments. I like all of that stuff. All that stuff is great. Yeah, I just think that the weak point is definitely the story and some of the motivations of the human characters. But again, because it's a Muppet movie, I could forgive it. So yeah, I would say 8 out of 10.
Yeah. Okay, so that's our first adventure into Jim Henson Month for In Search of the Crystal Skull. And coming up next week, we are going to venture into not so much comedic territory, but definitely into a darker territory. We are going to go into Jim Henson's The Dark Crystal.
Until then, everyone, catch you later.
Bye bye.